Nobody expected what happened next, not the teacher, not the other kids, not even me. But I knew one thing, she was still out there, and I wasn't going home without her. The blizzard hit so fast it felt personal. One minute the bus was crawling up the mountain road, the next it was sliding sideways into a snowbank with a sound like the whole world cracking open. Kids were screaming, glass broke somewhere in the back. And Ethan Walker, 20 years old, calloused hands, boots held together with electrical tape, grabbed the seat in front of him and held on. Nobody moved for him to lead. Nobody expected him to. They never did. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe to the channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The bus driver's name was Gerald, and he was the first one to say what everybody else was thinking. We need to get off this road, now. I didn't have to say it twice. The back wheels had gone sideways on black ice, and the whole vehicle was listing at an angle that made Ethan's stomach drop. Outside, the wind had turned the world white. Not the romantic kind of white you see in Christmas movies. Either the brutal, suffocating kind that gets into your lungs and makes every breath feel like swallowing broken glass. Ethan was on his feet before the bus had fully stopped moving. Not because he was brave, not because he'd thought it through. He moved because he'd grown up on a farm in Glacier County, Montana, and when something goes wrong with the equipment or the animals or the weather, you move. You don't wait around for someone else to do it. Hey, is everyone okay? He pushed down the aisle, checking faces. Some kids were crying. A girl named Brianna had a cut above her eyebrow. Marcus Chen, who sat in the back and liked to throw chips at Ethan during lunch, was shaking so hard his teeth were clicking. Nobody said thank you. Nobody moved to help him either. That was fine. That was normal. He found the emergency kit under the driver's seat, checked it, found a first aid pouch, and handed Brianna a gauze pad without being asked. Press that, hard. Don't tell me what to do, she said, and pressed the gauze to her forehead anyway. Gerald had already gotten the emergency door open. Outside, the cold came in like a wall. The wind was screaming. There's a ranger station about a half-mile up the ridge, Gerald said, shouting over the storm. We got to move. Everyone single file, stay together. Their teacher, Mr. Harmon, 42 years old, indoor man, the kind of teacher who graded on bell curves and coached JEV debate, pulled his coat tighter and said, everyone hold on to someone else. We stay together. They started moving. Ethan was the last one off the bus. He did a head count as they filed out the way his grandfather had taught him to count the herd. His grandfather, Earl Walker, had spent 60 years on a cattle farm and always said the same thing: you count the heads going in and you count the heads going out. Everybody else thinks of that as ranching. Earl said it was just human decency applied to livestock. Ethan applied it to people now. 12 students, 1 teacher, 1 driver. He counted again at the tree line. 11 students. He grabbed Gerald's sleeve. Someone's missing. Gerald turned. What? Someone's missing. I counted 12 on the bus. I only count 11 now. Harmon overheard and turned back, eyes already haunted. He did his own count. 11. His face went gray. Who? He started calling names. The wind ate half of them. Brianna, Jordan, Marcus. Ava, one of the girls said quietly. Keisha from Ethan's English class. She'd never spoken to him before that moment. Ava Mitchell. She was in the back. She was sleeping. The name hit the group like a cold wave. He could feel it, a visible flinch running through the cluster of teenagers. Even in the middle of a blizzard on the side of a Montana mountain, the name Mitchell meant something. Ava Mitchell, daughter of Mason Grizzly Mitchell, president of the Glacier County chapter of the Hells Angels. The man whose name people said in hushed voices. The man you did not make problems for. She probably got out on her own, Marcus said quickly. Too quickly. She's probably already ahead of us. She's not, Keisha said. I would have seen her. Harmon was already shaking his head. We cannot go back into that storm. I'm responsible for all of you. And what about her, Ethan said. The group went quiet, the wind didn't. Harmon looked at him. Teachers had a way of looking at Ethan, a particular kind of appraisal that landed somewhere between pity and mild irritation. Like he was a math problem they hadn't expected on the test and didn't particularly want to solve. Walker, I understand your instinct, but she's not with us. She was on that bus. The storm's getting worse. He said it the way he'd learned to say hard things on the farm, flat, factual, no drama. Just the true thing. Someone needs to go back. The conditions are too dangerous. The longer we wait, the more dangerous they get. Marcus stepped forward. He was bigger than Ethan, wider in the shoulders, and he used it the way boys that age always use size, like a kind of punctuation. Harmon's right. We can't go back into that. If she's stuck, the rescue teams will find her. That's what rescue teams are for. Rescue teams won't be here for an hour, minimum. You don't know that. I grew up out here, Ethan said. I know exactly what I'm talking about. That landed. A couple kids glanced at each other. Marcus's jaw tightened. Even if that's true, Harmon said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, like he was breaking the news about a bad grade. Going back alone is not a realistic option. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the training. I've got a rope in my bag and a flashlight, and I know how to build a snow shelter. He paused. Do you, Harmon stared at him. Ethan pulled his backpack off his shoulder, unzipped it. He'd packed the rope out of habit, the same habit that made him check the weather 3 times before any trip, keep a folding knife in his jacket pocket, carry trail mix in case the energy went sideways. His grandfather had called it being prepared. His classmates called it being weird. He pulled on the rope, wrapped it around his wrist once, and looked back at the storm. Behind him, Harmon said quietly, Walker, I'm asking you not to do this. You're not asking, Ethan said. You're hoping. He went back into the white. The cold was immediate, not gradual, immediate, like stepping into something alive, something that knew him and didn't like him. The wind came from his left, driving ice crystals into his cheek, and he turned his face away and kept moving. The bus was 50 yards back. He could barely see it. He used the rope as an anchor to a thick pine he'd passed on the way up. Tied one end, held the other, kept moving toward where he thought the bus was. His boots crunched through a crust of snow and broke through. Cold water filled his left boot immediately. He kept moving. The bus materialized out of the white like a shipwreck, dark tilted, already starting to disappear under a layer of drifting snow. Ethan grabbed the emergency door handle, yanked it open, and went in. Ava! His voice echoed off metal seats and broken glass. Nothing. Ava Mitchell, if you can hear me, call out. A sound from the back, low. Not quite a voice. He moved down the aisle, flashlight sweeping. Half the seats were twisted from the impact. Someone's backpack was upended in the middle of the aisle, spilling out a textbook and a bottle of hand sanitizer. He stepped over it. She was on the floor between the last 2 seats. She'd fallen during the impact and wedged herself down there, and when everyone else had scrambled out, she'd either been too dazed to call for help or too proud. He thought he knew which one. She was conscious, barely. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and her lips had that bluish cast that meant she'd been in the cold longer than anyone knew. Hey, he dropped to one knee beside her. Ava, I'm Ethan. I'm from your school. She blinked. Her eyes tried to find his face and almost managed it. I know who you are, she said. Her voice was thick and slow, like someone talking through a blanket. Farm boy. There it was. He'd been called that since 7th grade. Said like it was a punchline. He let it go the way he always let it go. Can you move? I need to know if anything's broken. She shifted, winced, shifted again. My ankle. I don't think it's... She pressed her lips together. It's not great. Okay. He was already taking stock. The storm was getting worse. He could hear it against the metal roof of the bus, a continuous roar that meant they were losing time. She couldn't walk. The ranger station was too far. Carrying her through that wind with a bum ankle between them and one rope tied to a pine tree was not a viable plan. His grandfather's voice, when you can't go forward and you can't go back, you make where you are into somewhere worth being. All right, he said, we're going to stay in here until the worst of it passes. The bus gives us some protection. In here, she pushed herself up onto her elbow. What about the others? They're at the ranger station. They're fine. You came back for me. He started unzipping his coat. Obviously. Why? Because you were still out here. He draped the coat over her shoulders. She started to protest and he cut her off. I've got more insulation than you. I grew up shoveling at 4 in the morning. Trust me. She looked at him for a long moment. Not the way she'd said farm boy, not like that at all. Like she was recalculating something. Like she'd had a set of numbers in her head for a while and they just stopped adding up. Okay, she said finally. Okay. He sat down beside her and started going through his pack. Trail mix, rope already deployed, the folding knife, a waterproof lighter his grandfather had given him when he was 16, a wool beanie that he'd been using to cover his ears and hadn't taken off all day. He pulled the beanie off and put it on her head. "Hey, I have the coat," he said. "You need something for your head." She touched the beanie with one hand, said nothing. Outside, the blizzard moved through its gears into something darker. 20 minutes in, she started shivering badly. He'd seen that in calves born in bad weather, the kind of deep shivering that meant the body was working hard to survive and running low on fuel to do it. He kept talking, not because he had anything brilliant to say, but because his grandfather had told him once that the sound of another voice was one of the most powerful things on earth. Keeps you tethered, keeps you from going somewhere you can't come back from. "Tell me something," he said. Her teeth were chattering. "Like what?" "Anything. What's your favorite food?" She stared at him. "My favorite food." "Yeah," a pause. "Then despite everything, blueberry pancakes, the ones my dad makes on Sunday." He filed that away. "Your dad cooks." Nobody believes that either. There was a sharpness to it, but also something underneath the sharpness. Something tired. People hear his name and they think whatever they think. They don't think Sunday pancakes. What do they think? She looked at him sideways. "You know what they think." "I know what I've heard," he said carefully. "That's not always the same as what I think." She pulled his coat tighter around her. "He's the scariest man in 3 counties. I know that's what people say. I've heard it my whole life." She was quiet for a second. "He's also the person who waited at my bedside for 4 days when I had pneumonia at age 7. Who learned to braid hair from a YouTube video when I was in 5th grade because I wanted pigtails and he didn't know how. Who cries at the end of Rudy every single time and pretends he's got something in his eye." Ethan listened. "He's also the president of the Hells Angels. And yes, there are things about that I don't ask about. And yes, people are scared of him." She exhaled. "But he's my dad. He's just my dad." Something shifted in the bus, or maybe just in the space between them. The storm pressed on. "My dad," Ethan said after a moment, "got his arm caught in a baler 3 years ago. Lost partial use of his right hand. We went from struggling to genuinely in trouble. Owe the bank more than the farm's probably worth." He looked at his own hands. "I've been picking up every side job I could find since I was 17. This trip," he shook his head faintly, "I'm here because I got paid $100 to help manage equipment for the day. That's why I was on the bus." She stared at him. $100. It's $100. The kids were calling you. I know what they were calling me." Another silence. Then she said with a directness that surprised him, "That's not fair." "No," he agreed, "but it's true. And I'd rather deal with what's true than pretend it isn't." She looked at him for a long time after that. Really looked. The kind of looking that people mostly forgot how to do somewhere around middle school. "You're not what I expected," she said. "You either," he said. Outside, the storm hit a new record. The bus shuddered, and then Ava Mitchell said something he hadn't anticipated. "My dad's going to come looking for me." "I figured. He's going to be," she paused, "he's going to be a lot." Is that a warning? It's a heads up. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved across her face. "He's going to want to know who stayed with me." "He can know," Ethan said. "I don't have anything to hide." She nodded slowly. "No," she said, "I don't think you do." The cold kept deepening. He could feel it in his fingers now, not the sharp, biting cold of the first hour, but the slower, heavier cold that settles in for the long haul. The bus offered them protection from the wind, but not from the temperature itself, which was dropping steadily towards something that would be genuinely dangerous if they didn't find a way to generate heat. One had the lighter. He could not obviously build a fire inside the bus. He thought through the options the way his grandfather had taught him, not panicking, not catastrophizing, just laying them out one at a time and looking at them honestly. Option 1 waited out. The storm looked like it had hours left in it. She was already shivering hard. That wasn't viable. Option 2 tried to move to the ranger station. She couldn't walk. He could carry her, but in this wind, in this cold, that was a significant risk. Option 3 used the seats. He stood up and started pulling at the bench seat above them. They were bolted in, but the crash had loosened things. After a minute of working at it, one end came free. "What are you doing?" She watched him with that focused, evaluating look. The foam in these seats is a decent insulator. If I can get a couple of them loose and build a barrier around us, slow down the heat loss. Oh, a beat. Can I help? You shouldn't be on that ankle. My hands work fine. He looked at her. She had her jaw set and her eyes level, the exact look of someone who was going to help whether or not she was invited to. He handed her the knife. The back panel on that seat, the vinyl facing cut along the seam. She took the knife. She didn't hesitate, which told him something. They worked for 20 minutes methodically dismantling what they could, building a low barrier of seat foam and torn vinyl that wasn't going to make anyone's list of great engineering achievements, but would in fact slow their heat loss by a meaningful amount. He'd learned the principle from an article about Arctic survival that he'd read twice and half remembered, and from basic farm logic, trapped air is warm air. Reduce the surface area, reduce the exposure. When they settled back behind the makeshift barrier, they were closer together than they'd been, close enough that he could feel her shivering through the contact of her shoulder against his. Still cold, he asked. Less, she admitted. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've still got... He checked his phone, no signal, but the time showed. Another 2-3 hours minimum before anyone gets to us. Unless my dad gets here first. How would he even know to come? She looked at him like this was the most innocent thing she'd ever heard. Because I'm missing, because he always knows, because... She stopped, seemed to edit herself. My dad has resources. He absorbed that. Right. Don't be scared of him, she said. When he comes, he's going to look scary. He's going to be loud. He will probably threaten you initially just because that's how he processes things. But if you're just honest with him and you don't back down and you don't pretend to be something you're not, he'll see you. Does he see a lot of people? She thought about that seriously. No, she said. Actually, not that many, but she glanced at him sideways. He'll see you. I wasn't sure what to do with that, so he tucked it away and asked her to tell him more about the Sunday pancakes. She talked for 40 minutes straight about her father and the pancakes and the braided hair and the way the whole chapter of the Hells Angels showed up to her 8th grade graduation and formation, and she'd been mortified and secretly incredibly proud. About her mother who'd left when Ava was 4 and who she mostly didn't think about. About how she'd wanted to go to college for environmental science but wasn't sure her grades were where they needed to be. About how the hardest part of being Mason Mitchell's daughter wasn't the fear other people felt, it was the loneliness. The way nobody at school ever just sat down next to her and started talking. He listened to all of it. He told her about the farm, about the Baylor accident, about his mother working double shifts at the clinic in town, and his little sister, Lily, who was 12 and wanted to be a veterinarian, and practiced her skills on every barn cat they had. About how he'd learned to weld and drive a tractor and read weather patterns and fix a combustion engine before he'd learned to drive a car. About how he liked the work, actually the realness of it, the way the farm didn't care about your status or your reputation, only whether you showed up and did the job. The storm rattled the bus. She laughed at something he said, a real laugh, unguarded, and the sound of it in that cold metal space was startling and warm. You know, she said, you're the first person at that school who's talked to me like a person in 3 years. 3 years is a long time. Tell me about it. I thought about all the times he'd seen her in the cafeteria sitting alone, eating with her eyes on her phone. He'd registered it the way you register things you tell yourself aren't your business. Now he wondered what it would have cost him to sit down. 100 calories of social courage. Maybe not even that. I'm sorry, he said. Not for I don't know, just... I'm sorry that's been your experience. She looked at him. Why are you apologizing? You didn't do anything. That might be the problem, he said. She thought about that for a long time. The wind began just barely, just at the edges to ease. What? He almost missed the sound under the storm. He'd been drifting, not sleeping, just that gray zone where consciousness gets thin and unreliable when something cut through. Not the wind, something rhythmic, mechanical. He sat up straight. Ava felt it immediately. What? He held up one hand, listened. The sound came and went in the wind, but it was there, the unmistakable, deep throb of motorcycle engines. Not one, several, many. He looked at her. She looked at him, and her whole face changed. He's here, she said. Her voice cracked on it, not in a way that was sad exactly. More the way something cracks when it's been under pressure for a long time, and the pressure suddenly releases. She pressed her hand over her mouth and her eyes went bright. He actually came, she said, like it still had the power to surprise her, even though she'd predicted it, like some part of her would always be the child in a hospital bed, waiting to see if her father would show. He pushed through the back of the bus, kicked the emergency door open, and came out into the storm. The wind hit him like an afraid train, but through it getting louder the sound of engines, and then the lights, multiple headlights, cutting through the white, like something out of a fever dream. He pulled off his outer shirt and waved it, shouting, though he had no idea if anyone could hear him over the wind. They could see the lights. That was enough. The first vehicle was a rescue truck, orange markings, Forest Service, followed immediately by 2, then 4, then 7 motorcycles in formation. In the blizzard, they looked surreal, enormous machines threading through the snow like they owned the mountain, which maybe they did. The rider on the lead bike stopped 30 feet away, cut the engine, dismounted. Mason Grizzly Mitchell stood 6 feet 3 and 250 pounds, and he moved through the blizzard like the weather owed him something. He wore a heavy leather jacket crusted with ice crystals. His beard had snow in it. His eyes, when they found Ethan standing in front of the emergency exit of the crashed bus, were the color of a winter river, gray-blue, and completely unreadable. He crossed the space between them in 8 steps. And Ethan, who had been cold for 3 hours and hadn't slept in 18 and was wearing a coatless in a Montana blizzard, held his ground. Not because he was trying to make a point, because stepping back felt wrong. Because the farm taught you that how you hold yourself in a difficult moment is the truest thing about you. Mason Mitchell stopped 1 arm's length away and looked at him for what felt like a very long time. Where is she? In the bus. She's okay. Her ankle might be sprained. She's cold, but she's stable. Mitchell's jaw worked. He looked past Ethan at the bus, back at Ethan. You stayed with her. Yes, sir. Something moved across the big man's face, too complex and too quick to name. Why, he'd been asked that question twice now, once by himself standing at the edge of the tree line with a storm bearing down, deciding whether to go back. Once now by a man who looked like he'd personally arm wrestled Winter and called it a draw. Ethan gave him the same answer both times. Because she needed help. Nobody else went, so I went. Mason Mitchell looked at him. The wind screamed between them. And then the big man stepped past him and went to the bus, and from inside came his daughter's voice, broken open, completely unguarded, saying one word, Dad. Ethan stood in the blizzard and gave them that. The members of the Hells Angels stood at a respectful distance, engines cooling snow accumulating on their shoulders like they were statues of something important. A few of them glanced at Ethan with expressions he couldn't fully interpret. Not hostility, something closer to assessment. One of them, shorter, wiry, with a graying beard, and the kind of eyes that had seen a great deal and filed it all away, walked over and handed Ethan a coat. Didn't say anything, just handed him the coat and walked back. Ethan put it on. He stood in the settling storm and breathed. From inside the bus, he could hear Mason Mitchell's voice, all that size and authority and reputation reduced to something almost unrecognizable, something soft and wrecked and entirely human. I've got you, baby. Dad's got you. I'm here. And Ethan looked out at the mountain going white and silent around him and understood in a way he didn't have words for yet that tonight had changed something. Not just for him, for everyone. Mason Mitchell did not cry in front of his men. That was a rule so old it had calcified into fact the way certain things do when you've lived a hard life long enough. He'd buried brothers. He'd lost his wife. He'd sat in county lockup for 31 days once on a charge that didn't stick, and he hadn't cried then either. His men knew him as granite, as weather, as the thing that didn't move when everything else did. But when he climbed into that wrecked bus and found Ava wrapped in a coat that wasn't hers, wearing a beanie that was too big for her head, sitting on a pile of torn seat foam with her ankle propped up and her chin lifted, the way she always lifted it when she was trying not to show how scared she'd been, something in his chest made a sound he felt more than heard. He crossed the aisle in 2 steps and pulled her against him and held on. Dad. Her voice was muffled against his jacket. Dad, I'm okay. I know you are. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, check her eyes, her color, the way a man checks something precious for damage. I know you are. He stopped. Reset. Your ankle. Probably sprained, not broken. I can tell the difference. You can tell the diff. He exhaled through his nose. You're not a doctor. I know what broken feels like. This isn't that. He looked at the makeshift barrier of seat foam and torn vinyl surrounding them, looked at the extra coat draped over her shoulders. His coat, he realized, recognizing it from somewhere, and at the wool beanie clearly not hers. At the trail mix wrappers on the floor, and the systematic, deliberate way this little shelter had been constructed inside a broken bus in the middle of a blizzard. Someone had been here. Someone had done all of this. He looked at his daughter, the boy outside. Ava met his eyes. His name is Ethan Walker. He came back for me when everyone else left. Mason absorbed that in silence. He gave me his coat, she said, and his hat, and he kept me awake, and he built, she gestured at the foam barrier. He figured out how to slow down the heat loss. He read it somewhere, he said. He kept saying things his grandfather taught him. She paused. His grandfather sounds like someone you'd respect. Mason looked at her for a long moment. The sounds of his men outside, the creak of the cooling bus, the last howl of the storm working through its final register. How old is he? 20. He a student. He was hired to manage equipment for the trip. He needed the money. She held his gaze. Dad, he stayed when everyone else, teachers, other kids, everyone said the storm was too dangerous. He tied a rope to a tree and went back in. Mason Mitchell said nothing, but something moved in his face, not the unreadable gray river expression he wore for the world. Something older, something that recognized itself in a story it hadn't expected to hear. He stood up. Let's get you to the truck. Go talk to him first. Ava, Dad. She said it the way she'd learned to say it over 19 years, not demanding, not pleading, just direct. The same directness he'd given her reflected back at him. Go talk to him first. He's out there in someone else's coat in the tail end of a blizzard. Go, I'm fine. He looked at her. Go, she said again. He went. Ethan was standing where Mason had left him, which itself said something. A lot of men, most men would have drifted toward the rescue truck, toward warmth and light, and the comfortable removal from whatever was coming next. Ethan Walker was standing in the snow in a borrowed coat, hands in his pockets, looking at the mountain, the way someone looks at something they have a complicated relationship with. Mason walked up and stopped beside him. Not in front of him, beside him. They stood like that for a moment. She says your name is Ethan. Yes, sir. Stop calling me sir. How long were you in there with her? Ethan thought about it. Close to 3 hours. What was her condition when you found her? Confused, hypothermic early stage, ankle injury. She'd been on the floor between the seats, probably hit her head during the impact. Nothing severe, but enough to slow her reaction time. By the time I found her, she was starting to get that disconnected look. Mason turned to look at him fully. You know what hypothermia looks like. I grew up on a farm in Montana. You learn. Farm where Glacier County, family operation. We run cattle and do some crop rotation. Did anyway. Things have been, he stopped himself. That's not relevant. What kind of cattle? The question was unexpected enough that Ethan blinked. Angus mostly, some Herefords, about 200 head before another stop, before things got difficult. Mason nodded slowly, not like he was taking notes, like he was doing the math on something. 200 head, that's a working operation, not a hobby farm. No, never a hobby. Mason looked back at the mountain. My father-in-law ran sheep in Wyoming, 40 years. I helped him with shearing 3 summers when I was about your age. He said it neutrally, like a fact he was laying on a table between them. People think I don't know what that work looks like. They're wrong. Ethan didn't say anything. He could feel the shape of what Mason was doing, building towards something, laying foundation, and he had the sense that the right response was patience. My daughter, Mason said, is the most important thing I have in my life, more than the chapter, more than the business, more than anything. He turned and looked at Ethan with the full weight of those gray-blue eyes. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. When I got the call that she was missing, that the bus had crashed and she wasn't with the group, he stopped. Something worked through his jaw. I've been in situations that would make most men's hair go white. I've never felt what I felt in that moment. You understand? Yes. So I need you to understand that what I'm about to say, I don't say lightly, and I don't say it often. He paused, exhaled. Thank you. Ethan nodded. I just did what needed doing. That's exactly it. Mason's voice dropped out. That's exactly it, son. Most people see what needs doing and they find a reason why it's not their problem. You didn't do that. He was quiet for a moment. She would have died. Ethan didn't flinch from it. Probably yes. The temperature was dropping fast. Another hour, maybe 90 minutes. I know. Mason cut him off. Not rudely, just because he knew. Because he'd already done the math 100 times on the drive up the mountain, and he knew exactly what the answer was. I know what the number is. I've been trying not to think about it directly. They stood in the receding storm. Your family, Mason said, the farm. You said things got difficult. Ethan went still. That's really not. I'm asking, Mason said. Simple, not a threat. Just the statement of a man who asked things directly and expected the same courtesy in return. Ethan looked at his own boots. My dad got hurt 3 years ago, lost partial function in his right hand. We've been managing, but the debt's gotten. He chose his words the way he always chose hard words, carefully without decoration. It's gotten to a point where we might lose the property. The bank's been patient, but they're not a charity. Mason said nothing. I don't want your sympathy, Ethan said. I'm not telling you that for any reason except that you asked. I know that. Mason looked at him. You turned down the offer before I even made it, didn't you? It wasn't a question. Ethan glanced at him slightly surprised. I didn't say anything about an offer. No, but you said everything else. Something moved at the corner of Mason's mouth. Not quite a smile, something more restrained. You're a stubborn one. My grandfather says it's a family trait. Your grandfather sounds like someone I'd get along with. He'd probably like you, Ethan said, and then seemed to hear himself and added, sir, respectfully. This time Mason actually smiled. Just slightly, just for a second. Told you to stop calling me sir. He looked back toward the bus where 2 of his men were now helping Ava out, supporting her weight, moving carefully on account of her ankle. Come to the hospital. My guys will drive you. Your temperature needs to be checked, and I'm not leaving this mountain without talking to you properly. I have to call my family first. Use my phone, better signal. He pulled it out and handed it over without hesitation, which was either a gesture of trust or evidence that his contacts list would terrify a federal agent, and he didn't care either way. Ethan took the phone, dialed home. His mother picked up on the second ring. Mom, it's me. I'm okay. He listened for a moment. Mom, I'm okay. There was an accident, but I'm fine. I need you to Mom. Listen to me. A long pause. He turned slightly away from Mason, not for privacy exactly, but because some conversations deserve a degree of facing inward. I know. I'm sorry you were shared. I love you too. A beat. Tell Lily the cows still need feeding. She knows the routine. Another pause. Yes, I'll explain everything later. I love you. He hung up, handed the phone back. Mason took it, said nothing, but Ethan caught the look on his face just for a second before it closed down again. Something almost naked, something that recognized in the way Ethan talked to his mother, something Mason Mitchell knew a great deal about and thought about more than he'd ever admit. The cost of being someone others worry about. The hospital was 40 minutes away. Ethan rode in the Forest Service rescue truck, insisting he was fine, getting overruled by a paramedic named Denise who checked his core temperature, said, "You're not fine, honey. You're in the 70s," in a way that left no room for argument, and wrapped him in so many warming blankets he could barely move. He sat in the truck and thought about Ava, about Mason, about the look on the other bikers' faces when they'd found them, that particular expression he still hadn't fully decoded. Not hostile, something else. He found out what it was when they got to the hospital. The Hells Angels did not wait in waiting rooms. That was the first thing he understood. They occupied the waiting area outside the emergency department, the way weather occupies a landscape completely inevitably, without particular aggression, but without any doubt about who was in charge of the space. Nurses moved around them with the careful efficiency of people who had learned that the fastest route to an uncomplicated evening was to simply do their jobs very well. One of the nurses, older, gray-haired, with the energy of a woman who had dealt with every variety of human crisis and categorized each of them, walked past Ethan's gurney, glanced at the group of bikers, and said to him under her breath, "Friend of yours." More or less, he said. "Lucky you," she said, and she said it like she meant it. He was put in a bay and worked up. His core temp was low, but not critically so. His fingers showed no signs of frostbite. His vitals were stable. The ER doctor, a young guy named Dr. Patel, who managed to be efficient without being dismissive, told him he needed to warm up, rest, and eat something, and handed him the most aggressively mediocre turkey sandwich Ethan had ever tasted, which he ate completely because he hadn't eaten in 6 hours and it tasted like survival. Ava was in the bay, 2 curtains down. He could hear her occasional words, her father's voice lower. The back and forth of a man and his daughter, recalibrating after a catastrophe that almost happened. Learning again in real time the specific relief of a disaster averted. Harmon appeared at the bay entrance 40 minutes in. Hay was freshly dry, which made Ethan conscious of his own still damp hair. Harmon had clearly gotten to the ranger station, gotten warm, gotten a coffee processed through the adrenaline, and now arrived in the hospital carrying the expression of a man who is about to do something he knows is inadequate but feels compelled to do anyway. "Walker," he said. "Mr. Harmon. I owe you." He stopped, restarted. "What you did tonight was either very brave or very reckless, and I've been going back and forth on which one for the last hour." "Does it matter which?" Harmon pulled up a chair, sat down, which Ethan hadn't expected. "I should have gone back," he said. "I'm the adult. I'm responsible for those kids. I looked at that storm and I made a calculation. You had 11 other students to get to safety. I had 12 students to account for." He met Ethan's eyes. "I know you're giving me an out. I appreciate it. I'm not sure I deserve it." He exhaled. "For what it's worth, and I'm aware it isn't much. I want you to know that I'll be recommending you for the school's Community Service Award, and I'm going to write a letter to the principal about what happened tonight, about what you did." Ethan looked at him for a moment. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. That's why I'm doing it." Harmon stood up, hesitated, then offered his hand. Ethan shook it. Harmon left. Ethan stared at the ceiling of his hospital bay and listened to the quiet sounds of the ER, the particular rhythm of a place built around emergencies, the background hum of machines and movement, and people being held together by technology, and attention in the stubborn human insistence on surviving. I was most of the way through a second turkey sandwich which a nurse had brought without being asked when the curtain moved and Mason Mitchell walked in. He didn't sit. He stood at the foot of the gurney with his arms crossed and looked at Ethan with that assessing gaze. And then he said, "Ava wants to see you when they clear her." "Okay. Her ankle is sprained, not broken." She was right. Something in his expression shifted. "She's usually right. I don't tell her that enough." Ethan said nothing. Mason uncrossed his arms, reached into his jacket and came out with something, a business card, but heavier than a standard card printed on thick stock. He set it on the edge of the gurney. "That's my direct number, not the chapter number. Mine." He held up a hand before Ethan could speak. "I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I'm just making sure that if you ever need to reach me, you can." "Okay," Ethan said again. "The farm," Mason said it like he was addressing a separate topic that had been waiting its turn. "Glacier County. Mr. Mitchell. I have a lawyer. His name is Daniel Park. He does financial restructuring and he's very good at his job. I'm going to have him call you. Before you say anything." He held up the hand again. "He's going to call you with information. What you do with the information is your business. He's not going to pressure you. He's going to explain your options, including options your current bank may not have told you about, because banks don't make money explaining options that reduce their income. That's all." Ethan looked at the card on the gurney, at Mason. "I didn't do what I did for a reward." "I know you didn't." Mason's voice was level and patient. "That's why I'm offering it." Ethan picked up the card, looked at it. "A phone call from a lawyer. Information, that's all. You can throw the card away after he calls. No obligation, no debt." Mason met his eyes. "I know you understand the difference between being helped and being owned. I'm not trying to own you, son. I'm trying to make sure a 20-year-old kid who walked into a blizzard to save my daughter doesn't lose his family's farm because his bank has bad intentions and he didn't know he had other options." Ethan thought about his mother, about Lily and the barn cats, about his father's right hand and the specific daily courage it took to keep going after something like that. He thought about his grandfather who'd spent 60 years on that land and what it would mean for it to be gone. He looked at Mason Mitchell. "I'll take the call," he said. Something in Mason's face resolved. Not relief exactly, something more like recognition. "Good." He moved toward the curtain, stopped. "I heard what you told Ava about why you went back. Ethan waited. Nobody else went, so you went. Mason said it slowly, like he was testing the weight of each word. You know how many people I've met in my life who actually think like that? I don't know. Not many. He looked at Ethan steadily. You hold on to that. The world works very hard to knock it out of you. Hold on to it anyway. He left. Ethan sat with that for a long time. Word had gotten around the hospital the way word always gets around in small communities, through nurses talking to nurses, through an orderly who'd overheard something in the ER bay, through the simple fact that 14 members of the Hells Angels in a hospital waiting room was not something that went unnoticed or undiscussed. By 9 o'clock that night, 2 local news vans were in the parking lot. By 10, Ethan's mother had arrived, having driven 40 minutes in the tail end of the storm, which he would have told her not to do if she'd asked, which she had not, and was sitting in the chair beside his gurney, holding his hand and not saying much of anything, which was its own kind of language. Her name was Carol. She was 44 years old and had been managing the emotional mathematics of an impossible situation for 3 years, with a precision and a quietness that Ethan had always found both admirable and heartbreaking. She worked as a medical receptionist at the clinic in town. She drove a 9-year-old Subaru and bought groceries based on what was on sale and had not, as far as he knew, complained about any of it once, not to him. She looked at him, assessed him the way she assessed everything quietly and completely, and said, "Your hands are still cold. They're warming up. You need to eat more. I had 2 turkey sandwiches." "That's not—" She stopped, looked at their joined hands. "Ethan, Mom, don't do that again. Mom, I know." She squeezed his hand. "I know who you are, and I know why you did it, and I know I cannot ask you to be different. I know all of that." Her voice was very steady, in the way that voices are steady when someone is working hard to keep them that way. "I'm just asking you to try not to do it again. Will you try?" "I'll try," he said. They both knew that was the most honest answer available, which was also why they both accepted it and moved on. She'd brought him dry socks because she was his mother, and this was the kind of practical love that kept the world from coming apart at the seams. He put them on. They were warm. It was one of the best feelings he'd had all day. An hour later, Ava was moved to a regular room. One of Mason's men, the wiry one who'd handed Ethan the coat, whose name turned out to be Deke, appeared at Ethan's bay entrance and said without preamble or particular warmth, "She wants to see you." Carol looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Carol. "Go," she said. He went. Shame. Ava's room was private, which Ethan suspected had been arranged rather than assigned. She was sitting up in the hospital bed with her ankle in a compression wrap, color back in her face, her hair still slightly damp, but combed back from her face. The beanie was sitting on the bedside table. She'd kept it. She looked up when he came in, and something in her face did what it had done in the bus, that recalculation. Like she kept expecting him to be different from what he was, and kept being surprised to find he wasn't. "You look less like death," he said. "You look about the same," she said, "which is to say, like you just spent 3 hours in a blizzard." He sat down in the chair beside her bed. "How's the ankle?" "It'll be fine in a few weeks. I have a good pain threshold." She looked at him sideways. "I get it from my dad." "That I believe." "He talked to you." "He did." "What did he say?" Ethan considered. "He said your grandfather was right about you being usually right, or he said you were usually right, and that he doesn't tell you that enough." She went quiet, a particular kind of quiet that meant something had landed somewhere deep. "He said that?" "More or less." She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. "He likes you," which for reference, he doesn't like most people. "His threshold is extremely high." "I got that impression." "He's going to want to be involved in your life now," she said. Not in a weird way, but he takes people seriously when he decides they're worth taking seriously. And I think he's decided. She studied Ethan's face. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it honestly. "No, should it? Some people find it intimidating. I'm not most people." "No," she said quietly, "you really aren't." A nurse came in to check Ava's vitals, efficient and cheerful. Clearly, one of those people who decided the bikers in the waiting room were more interesting than threatening and had adjusted accordingly. She left. The room settled back into its particular quiet. "Can I ask you something?" Ava said. "Yeah." "When you went back into the storm, when you turned around and walked back in." She was looking at him directly the way she'd looked at him in the bus, completely without filter. Were you scared? He didn't answer immediately. The honest answer deserved a moment. Yes, he said. I was scared the whole time. He shook his head. I'm not one of those people who doesn't feel, but I felt all of it. I knew exactly how bad it could go. He met her eyes. I was scared and I went anyway. Because being scared of something doesn't tell you anything about whether you should do it. She stared at him. My grandfather again, he said with a slight, self-aware tilt to it. I want to meet your grandfather, she said. He'd probably like you. Yeah, he likes people who say exactly what they mean. She smiled, genuine, unguarded, the same smile she'd had in the bus when he'd made her laugh. Different context, same quality. I've been told that's a flaw. By who? By people who haven't earned honesty yet, she said. He thought about that, nodded slowly. The hospital settled around them, quiet halls, distant sounds, the particular piece of a crisis resolved, and a night getting later. Outside the window, the storm had finally exhausted itself. The sky was doing that specific thing it does after a blizzard, going luminously clear. The stars coming out hard and sharp, the way they only do in winter at high altitude, like the violence of the weather had scoured the sky clean. My dad asked about your farm, Ava said. I know, he offered me a lawyer. Are you going to take the call? I said I would. She nodded, satisfied. Good. Then he doesn't offer things he doesn't mean. And he doesn't mean things he doesn't follow through on, just so you know. I figured that out. You figure things out fast. Farming, he said simply. You learn to read situations. She leaned back against her pillow, looking at him with an expression that had traveled a long way from Farm Boy, said like a punchline. You know what the worst part of tonight was? Getting stranded in a blizzard with a sprained ankle. No, she said. The worst part was that it took a blizzard for someone at that school to actually talk to me. He held her gaze. I'm talking to you now. Yeah, she said, and after a beat, don't stop. Outside the hospital in the parking lot, 14 motorcycles sat in a row under a clearing, Montana sky. Inside, Mason Mitchell sat in the waiting room with his men around him, and for the first time in hours, his hands were still. Not because everything was fine, but because something was. His daughter was safe. And the boy who'd brought her back, the farm boy in the borrowed coat who'd walked into the blizzard for no reason, except that it was the right thing to do, was sitting in a hospital room 2 floors up talking to her. Deke came and sat beside him, set a coffee down without being asked. You want to know what I think, Deke said. Not particularly, Mason said. Deke told him anyway. I think that kid's going to be around for a while. Mason picked up the coffee. Yeah, he said. I know. He stared at the wall, and for just a moment, in the privacy of the quiet and the aftermath, and the relief he hadn't let himself feel until right now, Mason Grizzly Mitchell allowed himself something he almost never did. He let himself think that things might actually turn out all right. 3 days after the blizzard, Ethan's phone rang at 6:40 in the morning. He was already up. The cows didn't care about dramatic events or hospital stays or the fact that he'd spent the night before staring at the ceiling, running through everything that had happened. They needed feeding at the same time they always needed feeding, and the farm operated on a schedule that predated every crisis in Ethan Walker's life and would outlast every one of them too, assuming the bank didn't get there first. He had hay on his boots, and his breath was fogging in the cold of the barn when the number came up, unknown, Montana area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. Something stopped him. Ethan Walker. Yes. My name is Daniel Park. I'm an attorney. Mason Mitchell asked me to call you. Ethan set down the hay fork. Right, he mentioned you. I'm going to be honest with you, because Mason tells me you respond well to that. Park's voice was measured, precise, the voice of a man who chose his words the way a carpenter chose his tools, for function, not decoration. I've looked at your family's loan documents. Mason sent me what he had: property records, the original loan terms, the modification you signed 18 months ago. Ethan went still. He pulled our loan documents. Public records, nothing your bank wouldn't hand over on request. A pause. Are you aware that the modification you signed changed the interest calculation method? My dad signed it. I was there. We were told it was a standard extension. It was not a standard extension. Park's voice stayed level. The modification converted your loan to a variable rate structure tied to a benchmark index. In the current environment, that means your effective rate has increased by roughly 2.5 percentage points since you signed. That's why your payoff number keeps climbing even when you make payments. Ethan leaned against the barn wall. The cows moved in their stalls. He processed what he was hearing the way he processed bad weather. Not panicking, just taking inventory of what he was dealing with. Are you telling me we were misled? I'm telling you the terms were not explained with the clarity the law requires. Another pause. I'm also telling you there are remedies. It's not a simple process, and I won't pretend it is, but there are legitimate legal pathways here that your bank has no interest in telling you about. That's what I wanted you to know. Ethan stared at the barn floor for a long moment. What does this cost? He said. Mason is covering my fee. No. It came out immediately, the same reflex that had made him start to refuse in the hospital. I'm not. Ethan. Park cut him off, not rudely, just cleanly. Mason anticipated this response. He asked me to tell you something specific when you said it. A brief pause, like he was checking a note. He said, tell him I'm not paying to help a poor kid. I'm paying to correct an injustice. And those are different things. If he can't accept that, tell him his grandfather would understand, even if he doesn't. The barn was very quiet. His grandfather. Mason had never met Earl Walker. He'd heard about him from Ethan for a total of maybe 10 minutes in a hospital parking lot, and somehow he'd understood exactly the right lever to pull. Ethan breathed out slowly. When can you start? I already have, Park said. He didn't tell his mother right away. Not because he was hiding it, he didn't hide things from Carol Walker. It wasn't in his nature, but because he needed to understand it himself before he handed it to her. She'd been carrying the weight of the farm's financial situation with a precision and a steadiness that cost her something daily. He knew that. He didn't want to give her hope that turned out to be smoke. I thought about it through the morning chores, through the feeding and the water checks and the fence repair on the east pasture that had been on the list for 2 weeks. Physical work had always been where he thought best, something about the rhythm of it, the way it occupied the part of his brain that liked to catastrophize and left the rest of him free to think clearly. By noon, he'd made his decision. He found his mother in the kitchen, going over the previous month's bills, the way she did at the end of every month, methodical quiet, her reading glasses on, and a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow. He sat down across from her and told her everything. Carol Walker listened without interrupting, which was one of her qualities that he'd always been grateful for. She let him lay it out completely: the call from Park, the loan documents, the variable rate conversion, the legal remedies. When he finished, she took her glasses off and set them on the table and looked at him. Mason Mitchell hired a lawyer for us, she said. Yes, because you saved his daughter. He says it's about correcting an injustice. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is he right about the loan? Park seemed certain, and he didn't strike me as someone who overstates things. Carol looked at her hands on the table, at the bills, back at Ethan. He watched her do the things she did, the internal recalibration, the adjustment of the reality she'd been carrying to accommodate new information. It took her about 30 seconds. Okay, she said. Okay. Your father needs to know. She put her glasses back on. Call him in from the shop. Robert Walker was 51 years old and had the particular dignity of a man who had been reduced by circumstance and refused to be defined by it. He'd lost the full use of his right hand in the baler and had spent 2 years learning to do everything differently: tools, technique, the small daily accommodations that nobody talks about because there's no dramatic version of them, just the slow grinding work of adaptation. He came into the kitchen with grease on his forearms and the slightly guarded look he wore whenever something happened that might turn out to be either good or bad. Ethan told it again, shorter this time. His father listened the way men who've worked hard listen, with their whole body still and attentive. When Ethan finished, Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A Hell's Angel trying to save our farm. His lawyer is. Because you saved his girl. That's the reason he's offering. I think the reason he's actually doing it is," Ethan paused, "I think he's the kind of man who doesn't let debts go unpaid, even debts nobody told him to pay." Robert looked at Carol. Something passed between them, the specific wordless communication of people who've been married a long time and gone through hard things together. Then he looked back at Ethan. "We accept," he said. "Dad, we accept," Robert said again, firm, not angry, just decided. "Son, I have spent 3 years being proud about this. Pride is a luxury we cannot afford. He picked up his coffee mug with his left hand, always the left now, habit rebuilt from nothing, and said, "Call the man's lawyer back. Tell him thank you." Ethan looked at his father. "You heard me," Robert said. "Yes, sir." He called Park back that afternoon. The news about the blizzard had been circling through Glacier County since the night it happened. Small communities have their own information networks faster than social media, more accurate than rumor, and deeply personal in the way only a place where everyone knows everyone can be. By the time Ethan got home from the hospital, 3 neighbors had already called Carol to check on him. By the next morning, the story had made it to the local radio station, presented by the morning host with a particular combination of civic pride and barely contained drama that defines small-town journalism at its best. Farm boy risks life in blizzard to save biker's daughter. That was the headline. Ethan found out about it secondhand from his sister Lily, who was 12 and had the complete digital literacy of her generation, and had not only found the article but had already read the comments section and reported back with the precision of someone who took information seriously. "Some people think you are a hero," she said, sitting across from him at breakfast. "Some people think you were stupid. One person wrote that you were clearly mentally unstable." "Thanks, Lily. I told that person they were wrong in the comments. You should not be in comment sections. I was defending your honor." He looked at her, this 12-year-old who wanted to be a veterinarian and practiced on barn cats and took the world absolutely seriously. "Thank you," he said. "Don't do it again." "I can't promise that," she said, and went back to her cereal. The attention was uncomfortable for him, which was not something he'd anticipated. He'd acted without thinking about consequences, which was what his grandmother used to call doing something clean. No expectation attached, no audience in mind, just the thing itself. The attention turned it into something else, put a frame around it, made it a story rather than an event which felt subtly wrong in a way he couldn't fully articulate. I was dealing with that discomfort 3 days after the hospital when Ava called. He'd given her his number in the hospital, written on the back of a receipt from his jacket pocket. She'd given him hers. Neither of them had said anything specific about using them, which was a particular kind of almost agreement that teenagers and people who are 20 but feel older negotiate without words. "How's your ankle?" he said. "Annoying," she said. "I'm on crutches. My dad treats me like I'm made of glass and I'm losing my mind." He's scared. "I know, I'm still losing my mind." A pause. "How are you doing with all the attention?" "Not great." "Yeah." She understood immediately, which surprised him less than it would have a week ago. "People keep talking about what you did like it was some kind of, I don't know, some kind of performance. Like you did it for the story." "I didn't." "I know you didn't. I was there." She paused. "Some kids at school are acting like it was the most dramatic thing that's ever happened. Like it's fun. Like they were part of something." "Were they bothered about leaving you behind?" Behind a long silence. "2 of them texted me, said they were sorry. The others," she stopped. He could hear her editing herself. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter. It doesn't change anything." "No," he said, "but it matters anyway." Another silence, different quality, the kind that means someone is deciding how honest to be. "Marcus Chen called me," she said, apologized, said he was scared and made the wrong call, and he was sorry. Ethan hadn't expected that. "How'd that land?" "Weird," she said. I've been ignored by that kid for 3 years. You get used to the version of someone that treats you a certain way, and then they do something that doesn't fit, and you don't know what to do with it. Maybe it fits better than the old version. Maybe." She didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe people are nice to you after a crisis and then go back to normal when the crisis stops being interesting." "Some people do that," he said. "Some people actually change." "Which kind is Marcus?" I thought about Marcus shaking in the bus. The way his voice had sounded when he argued against going back, not cruel, just scared. There was a difference, and Ethan had always been able to feel it. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I think he's scared most of the time, and it comes out wrong. I don't know if he knows that yet." Ava was quiet for a moment. "You're more charitable than I am." "I'm not sure that's charity. I know what scared looks like. Even when it looks like meanness. Especially then." She thought about that. He let her. "My dad wants you to come to dinner," she said. "Sunday, at our place." He hadn't been expecting that either. The week was full of things he hadn't been expecting. Dinner. Yeah, Sunday. He makes blueberry pancakes in the morning, and his actual cooking at night is honestly, it's better than it has any right to be given everything else about his life. He does this short rib thing that she stopped. Sorry, I'm selling it. You don't have to come. I want to come, he said. And then, because he was someone who said true things even when they were slightly inconvenient, I'm a little nervous about it. Don't be. Easy to say. The men are going to be there, some of them. They want to, she paused, choosing words. My dad didn't say this exactly, but I know him. They want to look at you, the chapter. They have their own way of deciding about people, and they like to do it in person. He absorbed that. I'm being assessed. We all are always. This is just more formal. A beat. Ethan, you walked into a blizzard for me. Nothing those men could do would be as hard as what you've already done. That's either reassuring or terrifying. Both, she said. Probably both. Sunday came with clear skies and cold that had teeth but not malice. The functional cold of a Montana winter doing its regular job, nothing personal about it. Ethan drove his mother's Subaru because his own truck had developed an opinion about starting in temperatures below 20 that he didn't have the time or money to argue with. The Mitchell property was 12 miles outside of town. He'd known approximately where it was. Everyone in Glacier County knew approximately where it was, the way you know where certain landmarks are without necessarily having been to them. A gravel road off the county highway flanked by trees, opening up to a property that was larger than he'd imagined, and somehow both exactly what he'd expected and completely different. He sat in the car for 30 seconds before getting out. Not from fear, just from the same instinct that made him count heads on the bus, taking stock before stepping into something. Deke was on the porch. Of course Deke was on the porch. He looked at Ethan the way he'd looked at him in the blizzard that filed away completely assessment and then gave a single nod that communicated approximately 15 things at once. Walker, he said. Deke, Ethan said. He'd learned the name at the hospital. Deke had not expressed either surprise or pleasure at being remembered. They're inside. He went inside. The house was warm and smelled like something with meat and herbs that made his stomach remind him he hadn't eaten since morning. There were 7 men in the living room, seated or standing, the kind of comfortable occupancy of a space that said these men had been here many times and treated the place as an extension of wherever they were. They all looked at him when he came in. I didn't look away. Not because he was trying to prove something. That kind of performance read immediately in rooms like this one, and it never played well. Just because looking away felt dishonest and dishonesty felt wrong. Mason came out of the kitchen. Handshake, first firm, dry brief. Glad you came. Thank you for having me. You remember Deke? He gestured around the room. This is Roy. This is Santos. That's Paulie on the end, and the two in the corner arguing about something that doesn't matter are Beck and Tomas. He said it the way you introduce family, assuming you'll remember not making it a test. Ava's upstairs. She'll be down. How's the ankle? She's been on the crutches for 4 days, and she's been insufferable about it for 3.5. There was a warmth in the way he said it that was entirely at odds with his reputation and entirely consistent with every version of him Ethan had encountered. Sit down. Beer. I'll take water, thank you. Roy, who was heavy-set with a gray beard and the eyes of someone who found most things funny, raised an eyebrow. You don't drink. I drive an old truck on country roads in Montana winter, Ethan said. I drink, but not before driving. Roy looked at Mason. Mason said nothing. Roy seemed to find this answer satisfactory and went back to his beer. Santos, who was lean and dark-haired and had the coiled-up quality of someone who had spent time being very dangerous and hadn't entirely left that behind, leaned forward in his chair. You're the kid who walked into the blizzard. I'm the kid who walked into the blizzard, Ethan said. Why, yeah, he'd been asked this question more times in the past week than he could count. By nurses, by reporters who'd gotten his number somehow, by Harmon, by Mason twice, by his grandfather who'd called from Arizona where he wintered now, and who had listened to the answer and then said simply, that's right, in the voice he used when something confirmed what he already knew. He gave Santos the same answer he gave everyone. She was still out there. Nobody else went. Santos looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat back, nodded once. Done. Beck from the corner said, you know how to fight. Beck, Mason said. It's a real question. It's a rude question. I'm asking because... Yes, Ethan said. Everyone looked at him. Not I'm not trained. I've never had a fight for sport or whatever. He kept his voice level. But I grew up on a farm and I'm 20 years old and I've handled situations. I can handle myself. Beck evaluated this. Apparently it passed whatever internal standard he applied because he nodded and went back to the corner. Tomas, who hadn't spoken yet and had the quiet of someone who speaks rarely and means everything when he does, looked at Ethan from across the room. Your family's farm, he said, the bank situation. Park is working on it. Park is good, Tomas said. He's fixed worse. There was something in the way he said it, a specificity, a knowledge that made Ethan think Tomas was speaking from personal experience rather than secondhand knowledge. He didn't ask. Some things aren't yours to ask about. I appreciate it, Ethan said. All of it. I want to be clear. I didn't do what I did for any of this. I want that to be clear. We know that, Mason said. That's the only reason any of this is happening. Ava came downstairs on her crutches, navigating with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd already had 4 days to master them and had the stubbornness to master them quickly. She came into the living room, took in the scene, Ethan in the chair, the assembled chapter. Mason standing to the side, and something in her face relaxed incrementally, like she'd been holding a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You came, she said. Said I would. She crouched over and took the chair beside him, propped her ankle up on the coffee table with the automatic confidence of someone who owned the room regardless of who else was in it, and said to the group at large, Okay, has everyone finished with the interrogation? Roy raised his beer. Pretty much. Good. She looked at Ethan. How'd they do? Fine, he said. Better than expected. That's because I told them to behave. She shot a look at Beck. Mostly. Beck shrugged, unapologetic. Mason disappeared back into the kitchen. The sound of something sizzling picked up. The room shifted, not dramatically, just incrementally, the way a room shifts when the main event has concluded and something more comfortable begins. Dake sat down across from Ethan, set down his water, also not drinking. Ethan noted and said conversationally, like it was a continuation of something, Your grandfather taught you to read weather. And everything else. Where is he now? Winter's in Arizona, too cold up here for his joints. He's 78 and he has opinions about it. He paused. He called me after the blizzard. Said I did right. Deke nodded. A man your age whose grandfather calls to tell him he did right, that's not nothing. Ethan looked at him. He's the best person I know. Better than your parents. Different better. He thought about how to say it. My parents are strong because of what they've endured. My grandfather is strong because of what he's built. Both kinds matter. His kind, the built kind, that's what I want. Deke absorbed that. What's his name? Earl. Earl Walker. Deke nodded slowly. Tell Earl he raised someone worth raising. Ethan felt that land somewhere deeper than he expected. I will, he said. Dinner was around a table that had clearly hosted many such gatherings, the kind of table that had absorbed years of meals and conversations, and the specific democracy of people who've chosen each other, choosing to eat together. Mason's short ribs were in fact obscenely good. Ethan said so, and Mason looked quietly satisfied in the way that people who cook well look satisfied when their food is properly appreciated, not proud, just pleased. The conversation ranged. Sports, which Ethan followed loosely. Farming, which turned out to be more widely understood around this table than he'd expected. Santos had worked irrigation in the Central Valley in his 20s. Roy had an uncle with a property in Wyoming. The barn cats, which he mentioned in passing, and which generated a detailed side conversation about feral cat management that was completely surreal and deeply comfortable. And then between the main course and whatever Mason was doing in the kitchen, that smelled like it might be pie. Roy set down his fork and said with the directness of a man who'd waited until the timing was right, We heard what you said to the teacher before you went back in. The table went quieter. Ethan waited. You said, Roy paused, not for effect, actually recalling it. You said you can tell the difference between someone asking and someone hoping. He tilted his head. That's a sharp thing for a 20-year-old to say. My grandfather says there are two kinds of authority, Ethan said. The kind people give you and the kind you take. The kind you take rarely survives a real test. Roy looked at Mason. Mason kept eating. Harmon took the kind, Santos said. Harmon was scared, Ethan said. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he calculated and came up with the wrong answer, and he'll have to live with knowing that. You forgive easy, Beck said. Not critically, just observationally. I don't know if it's forgiveness, Ethan said. He tried to find the right words. I can't afford to use up energy being angry at people for being scared. Scared is just scared. It doesn't always mean something permanent about who someone is. The table was quiet for a moment. Ava was looking at him with an expression he was learning to read, the one that meant she'd just cataloged something he'd said and was filing it somewhere she planned to return to. Say more about that, Mason said. He'd been quieter at dinner than Ethan had expected, listening more than talking. Ethan thought about it. My dad, when he got hurt, he went somewhere dark for about a year, said things, did things, pulled away from all of us. Not mean just absent, like the part of him that knew how to be present had gone somewhere to deal with what happened. He looked at the table. For a while I was angry about that. I was 17, I needed my dad, and he wasn't there. The table was very still. Then one day I watched him figure out how to use a socket wrench one-handed. Took him 2 hours to do something that used to take him 10 minutes. He didn't ask for help. He didn't quit. He just worked it out. He looked up, and I understood that he hadn't left. He'd just been somewhere dealing with something I couldn't see the way people sometimes have to. And he came back. Mason set his fork down. I stopped being angry, Ethan said, because anger at the absence would have meant I missed the return. The silence after that was the kind that means something was said that everyone in the room needed to hear, and everyone in the room knew it, and nobody was going to cheapen it by responding too quickly. Ava reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly. Just briefly. The way you touch something you want to make sure is real. Then Mason stood up and went to get the pie, which was apple and had clearly been made from scratch, which said something about the man that nothing else had quite managed to say. It was close to 9 when Ethan said he should head home. Chores waited regardless of what kind of Sunday you'd had, and his father's shoulder had been bothering him, which meant Ethan would need to be up early. Mason walked him to his car. They stood in the cold breath, fogging the particular quiet of a rural property. At night sounds that city people mistake for silence, but are actually a dense layering of small noises that add up to a kind of peace. Park called me this afternoon, Mason said. He thinks he can get your loan renegotiated. The rate conversion was, in his words, aggressively under-disclosed. He has a case. Ethan exhaled. Okay. It'll take a few months. You'll need to make the current payments in the meantime, which I know is... We'll manage, Ethan said. We've been managing. Mason looked at him. What you said at dinner, about your father. Ethan waited. My daughter's mother left when Ava was 4. He said it directly, no decoration. The tone of a man who's made peace with something painful by refusing to dress it up. I went somewhere dark too, not for a year longer. I came back, but... He exhaled. Ava was 7 when I actually came back. Those 3 years, he stopped. Something moved through his expression. She doesn't talk about it. I don't bring it up. But I know what it cost her. Ethan said nothing, because nothing was the right thing. She doesn't let people in, Mason said. Not since she was 7 and learned that people leave. She has walls that would impress a military engineer. He looked at Ethan with a directness that didn't demand anything, just stated, she let you in. In a bus in a blizzard in 3 hours she let you in. You understand what I'm telling you. I think so, Ethan said carefully. I'm not asking you to make promises. You're 20. She's 19. I know what 20 and 19 are. Mason paused, seemed to be weighing something. I'm just telling you the information. I won't treat it lightly, Ethan said. I know you won't. Mason extended his hand. You're welcome here, Ethan. Anytime. Ethan shook it, held the grip for a moment. Thank you for dinner, for the lawyer, he gestured vaguely at the house, the evening, the chapter inside. All of it. Don't thank me, Mason said. Just keep being who you are. He drove home on empty roads under a sky full of stars, the heater working hard in his mother's Subaru, thinking about all of it, the dinner and the men and the things said and the things left unsaid, and what it meant that Ava had touched his hand briefly across the table, like making sure something was real. He was 2 miles from home when his phone buzzed on the seat. A text from Ava. 3 words. Thank you for coming. He pulled over. Typed back. Thank you for the invite. Your dad's short ribs are the best thing I've eaten in a year. Tell him I said so. He waited. 3 dots appeared. He already knows. He watched you eat. He noticed. He almost texted back a response and then stopped because something about that image, Mason Mitchell, president of the Glacier County Hells Angels, watching to see if a 20-year-old farm boy properly appreciated his cooking, was so unexpectedly human that Ethan needed a moment to just sit with it. He typed, "He's a good man," a pause. Then, "Yeah, he really is." He put the phone down and pulled back onto the road. Behind him, 12 miles away, a light was still on in the Mitchell house. And inside it, a man who terrified half the county was standing at his kitchen sink washing dishes, thinking about the boy who'd walked into a blizzard and come out with something none of them had expected. Not a reward, not attention, not a story to tell. Just the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who knew exactly who he was. And Mason Mitchell, who had seen a great many things in his life and had learned to trust his read of people, above almost everything else, had a thought that settled into him, the way true things settle slowly without drama, all the way down to the foundation. That kid he thought is going to be fine, and then he amended it. That kid he thought is going to be better than fine. He turned off the kitchen light. Outside, the Montana stars did what they always did, burn cold and steady and completely indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding beneath them, which somehow made those dramas feel more real, not less. Like the only things worth doing are the ones you do, even if nobody, not even the sky, was watching. 6 weeks after the blizzard, the bank called. Not Park, not Mason. The bank itself, specifically a man named Gerald Pratt, who was the senior loan officer at First Mountain Savings and had been handling the Walker account for 2 years, with the particular brand of polished sympathy that people in his profession deploy when they are about to do something that benefits them at your expense. Ethan's mother took the call. He was out on the east fence when she came to get him, walking across the frozen ground with her coat half buttoned and that specific tightness around her eyes that meant something had happened, and she was already managing how she felt about it. "Pratt called," she said. Ethan pulled off his work gloves. "And he knows about Park." She said it carefully, watching his face. "He said the bank is," he used the word, "concerned about the relationship between our account and outside legal counsel. He wants to meet." "To meet?" "Thursday, his office." She paused. "He was very polite about it." "He's always very polite about it," Ethan said. He called Park from the barn, standing in the same spot where he'd taken Park's first call 6 weeks ago, which felt appropriate in a way he couldn't have explained. Park picked up on the second ring. "I heard," he said. "Pratt called my office 40 minutes ago. I was waiting for you to call me." "What does he want?" "I wants to know how much you know, whether the legal challenge is serious or whether it's a pressure tactic." Park's voice was precise and unhurried, the voice of a man who found confrontation clarifying rather than stressful. "It's a fishing expedition. He wants to assess the threat before he decides whether to negotiate or dig in." "What do you recommend?" "Go to the meeting. Be polite. Don't tell him anything he didn't already know. Let him talk." A pause. "And let me come with you." "To the bank." "Is that a problem?" Ethan thought about it. A lawyer walking into First Mountain Savings alongside a farmer with a delinquent loan modification was a particular kind of statement. Clear, unambiguous, and expensive looking. "No," he said. "No problem at all." He told his father that night. Robert listened, jaw tight, and then said, "I want to come." "Dad, it's my loan. My name is on it." He met Ethan's eyes with the kind of look that ended arguments before they started. "I'll let Park do the talking, but I'll be there." Ethan looked at his father, at the set of his shoulders, the careful control in his face, the quiet fury of a man who had endured a great deal and was finally in a room where someone was on his side. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, you should be there." Thursday came gray and cold. The three of them, Ethan, Robert, and Daniel Park, sat in the lobby of First Mountain Savings for 11 minutes before Pratt came out to greet them. The 11 minutes were deliberate, Ethan knew, a positioning move. You make people wait to remind them of the power differential. He'd seen the same thing done by a livestock buyer once who'd kept his grandfather waiting in a cold truck for 20 minutes before a negotiation. His grandfather had gotten out, walked around, fed the horses, and been cheerful as a summer morning when the buyer finally appeared. Pratt got 3 people who'd used the 11 minutes to drink bad coffee and read the documents Park had brought. Pratt was 53, silver-haired, with the build of a man who'd played college football and kept the discipline, if not the conditioning. He smiled at them with the specific warmth of a man who understood that warmth was a professional tool. "Robert, Ethan," He extended his hand. And you must be Mr. Park. Daniel Park. Park shook it without warmth, not rudely, just without any of the social performance that Pratt was clearly expecting. Thank you for your time. They went into the conference room. Pratt started with pleasantries, whether Robert's shoulder, how the farm was doing generally, and Park let him run through it with the patience of a man who could wait out pleasantries the way you wait out traffic. When Pratt finally arrived at the point, Park was already there. I understand there's been some review of the Walker account, Pratt said, the modification from 18 months ago. Extensive review, Park said pleasantly. Pratt's smile stayed exactly where it was, which itself communicated something. I want to be clear that the bank has always operated in good faith with the Walker family. I'm sure the bank's intentions were good, Park said. The issue isn't intention. The issue is disclosure. He opened his folder, slid a document across the table. The modification agreement converted the Walker's loan to a variable rate structure without, and I want to be precise here, without providing the required written disclosure under Montana Code annotated 326316 subsection 3, which mandates clear written explanation of rate change mechanisms in plain language before any such modification is signed. Pratt looked at the document. The document the Walkers signed in, Park continued, references the rate change in Section 12, subsection C, paragraph 4 in language that would require a financial attorney to parse. It was not explained verbally. We have the Walkers' testimony to that effect, and it was not provided in a plain language summary as required. The room was very quiet. Robert Walker had his hands flat on the table and was looking at Pratt with an expression Ethan had seen exactly once before the day the bailer took his hand, in the split second before the pain hit, when Robert understood with perfect clarity what had just happened to him. Not rage, something colder and more precise than rage. Now Park said, in the same pleasant, unhurried voice, I want to be clear about what we're asking for because I think we can resolve this without anyone going to the Montana Division of Banking and Financial Institutions, which I'm sure neither party wants. He folded his hands on the table. We're asking for the loan to be restructured to the original fixed-rate terms that existed before the modification, with any interest overpaid under the variable rate to be credited against the principal. We're not asking for damages. We're not filing a complaint. We're asking for a correction. Pratt looked at the document for a long time. I'll need to discuss this with our legal team, he said. Of course, Park said. I'd suggest expediting that discussion. We have a 30-day window before certain regulatory options become attractive that currently aren't. He closed his folder, smiled. We can wait. They shook hands. They left. In the parking lot, Robert stopped walking, put one hand on the hood of the Subaru, his left hand, always the left, and stood there for a moment with his head down. Ethan stopped beside him. Dad. Robert looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, which was the closest to crying that Ethan had ever seen from him. 3 years, he said. We've been 3 years making those payments, watching the number go up, thinking we were thinking it was us. His voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly, just enough. Thinking we couldn't manage, thinking we weren't. It wasn't us, Ethan said. I know. Robert straightened up, pressed his left hand briefly to his eyes, took a breath that came back out steady. I know that now. He looked at his son. You should call Mason tonight. I will. Tell him, Robert paused. Something worked through his face that Ethan recognized as a man assembling something important out of components that don't fit together easily. Tell him we're grateful. Tell him I said so. Tell him I'd like to shake his hand. Ethan nodded. Park walked to his car, gave them the privacy of a man who understands that some moments aren't his, and said over his shoulder, I'll call when Pratt's legal team comes back. Expect 2 weeks. It took 9 days. The offer that came back from the bank was not everything Park had asked for. It was close. The loan would be restructured to a fixed rate slightly higher than the original rate, which Park called acceptable, and Mason called insufficient, and Robert called good enough. The overpaid interest wouldn't be fully credited against the principal, but half of it would be, which amounted to a reduction in the outstanding balance that made the farm's situation for the first time in 3 years genuinely manageable rather than theoretical. Park called it a win. Robert called it the first good news he'd had since before the Baylor. Ethan called Mason. Park told me, Mason said before Ethan could start. 9 days, I told you he was good. My father wants to thank you in person. A pause. He doesn't have to do that. He wants to, Ethan said. That's the point. He's not doing it because he has to. Another pause. All right, when he said you name the time. Mason was quiet for a moment. Ethan could hear the particular quality of a man thinking, not hesitating, not stalling, actually working something out. Saturday, he said. 11, bring him to the shop. I'll introduce him to the chapter. Ethan delivered that message to his father at the kitchen table where Robert was going over the new loan terms with a calculator and the focused attention of a man who had been wrong-footed once and intended to understand every number from here forward. Robert looked up. He wants to meet the chapter. He said, introduce you. His father considered this. You trust these men? Ethan thought about Roy and his dead serious discussion of feral cat management, about Santos in the Central Valley and the nod that ended the assessment, about Deke in the coat in the blizzard and the line about Earl Walker raising someone worth raising, about Tomas and the quiet that meant everything. Yes, he said, I do. Robert nodded once, went back to the calculator. Saturday at 11 then, his sister Lily asked with the complete directness of a 12-year-old who has decided she is entitled to information. Are you dating Ava Mitchell? Ethan was washing dishes. He did not stop washing dishes. What makes you ask that? You text someone every night before you go to sleep. You smile at your phone. You told Mom she'd like her. Lily ticked these off with the precision of someone presenting evidence. And you've been going over to their house. I had dinner there, once that we know about. He looked at her. Mom knows too. She's just more subtle about asking. Lily leaned against the counter with her arms crossed in a posture that was an uncanny echo of Carol Walker. Is she nice? Ethan turned back to the dishes. Yes, she's very nice. Is she nice to you or just nice in general? The distinction surprised him. Both, he said, equally. Lily seemed to file this satisfactorily. Good. You don't need someone who's only nice in general. Ha had in fact been to the Mitchell property 3 times since the Sunday dinner. Not dates exactly, there was a looseness to how they spent time together that resisted the formality of that word. Ava's ankle had come off the crutches at day 10 ahead of schedule, which she'd announced with the satisfaction of someone who'd predicted it and was not above saying so. They went for drives on the county roads. They sat in her kitchen and she made tea and he told her more about the farm and she told him more about what she wanted to study, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with blizzards or bikers or banks until it was late and the drive home was dark and quiet. He'd kissed her on the 3rd visit, standing at her front door, which was not the most original location in the history of first kisses, but was, Ethan would argue, the most honest one, no backdrop, no performance, just 2 people at a door at the end of an evening that had been so naturally good that ending it felt wrong. She'd kissed him back, which was the part that mattered. He hadn't told anyone except apparently his phone habits had told Lily. That Saturday, he drove his father to the Mitchell shop, which was a large commercial space 2 miles from the house where the chapter did mechanical work. Bikes mostly, but also vehicles belonging to various people in the county who knew that the Hells Angels mechanical skill was the best in 3 counties and their prices were fair. The shop had the organized functional character of a place run by people who took craft seriously, and Robert Walker, who had spent 40 years taking craft seriously, felt it immediately. Mason came out to meet them. He and Robert shook hands with the particular solemnity of 2 men who understood they were meeting for a specific reason and didn't want to diminish it with too much preamble. Robert, Mason said. Mason. His father held the handshake an extra beat. I owe you a thank you that I can't pay back. You don't owe me anything. My son says the same thing and I told him the same thing I'm going to tell you. Robert looked at Mason directly man to man, the full weight of 3 years of a hard thing in his voice. In my family, we acknowledge what people do for us. We don't let it pass. So I'm acknowledging it. Mason held his gaze, nodded once. Your son, Robert said, walked into a blizzard for your daughter. My family and I were glad he did. We're glad she's all right. He paused. And I think maybe we were always going to end up here. The 2 of them. These 2 families. I don't know if I believe in the kind of fate that plans things out, but I believe in the kind that puts people in each other's paths and lets them choose. He glanced at Ethan briefly, then back at Mason. I think they chose right. Mason was quiet for a moment, then come see the shop. Han gave Robert the full tour, not the performative kind, but the working kind, pointing out what was being repaired and why, explaining the mechanical logic, treating Robert as someone whose judgment on craft was worth engaging. Robert asked questions that showed he understood what he was looking at, and Mason answered them with the respect of one craftsman to another. And Ethan stood slightly to the side and watched his father come alive in the way he did when someone treated his knowledge as valuable. Deke came over at one point and stood beside Ethan. Watched the same thing Ethan was watching. Your father, Deke said, he's a straight-line man. What does that mean? Means he goes from where he is to where he needs to be without a lot of wandering. Deke tilted his head slightly. Runs in families, apparently. Ethan looked at him. Deke was already walking away. So, the thing Ethan hadn't fully anticipated was how the town would keep moving around him while his own life was doing what it was doing. He heard about it from Keisha first. Keisha, who'd told them Ava was missing in the blizzard, who'd never spoken to him before that night, and had apparently decided that moment had changed something. She caught him in the parking lot of the grocery store a month after the bank meeting, coming out with a bag of feed supplement for the herd. Hey, she said, I wanted to tell you something. He stopped. Yeah, Marcus Chen. She said the name like she was delivering a piece of news she wasn't sure how to characterize. He's been different since the blizzard. He was always the guy who set the tone, who decided what was acceptable, the farm boy thing, all of it. He set that tone. I know. He stopped. She met his eyes. I don't know if that means anything to you, but he stopped. And when somebody tried to say something last week, he told them to quit it. Ethan absorbed that. Did he? Yeah, a pause. I think the blizzard scared him, not the cold. She seemed to search for the right word, the mirror of it, seeing himself in a situation where it mattered what you did, seeing what he did. He apologized to Ava, Ethan said. I know, she told me. Keisha adjusted the strap on her bag. She talks to me now. We have lunch sometimes. She says you introduced her to the concept of just sitting down next to someone. He thought about the bus, about all the days before the bus. I didn't really do that. She says you did. She did it herself. Keisha smiled, nodded at him exactly more at the shape of the thing. That's what she says about you. She started to go, stopped. You did right, Ethan. That night, I just wanted to say that. Not because of the drama of it, just you did right. He nodded. Thank you. She left. He stood in the parking lot with feed supplement in one hand and thought about the way decisions move through communities, like weather moves through a landscape, touching everything, changing small things, leaving evidence long after the original event has passed. One night, one decision, and here were the ripples still moving. The night that changed everything again came on a Tuesday in February, which was not a dramatic night by any external measure. Ethan was at the Mitchell house this time with Ava at the kitchen table, ostensibly working through the college application. She'd been avoiding actually having a conversation about it that kept expanding into adjacent territories because that was the nature of conversations between them now. They'd stopped fighting the expansion. It led to better places. Mason came in from the garage, washed his hands, looked at them at the table and said with the precision of a man who had been thinking about something for a while and had decided to say it, Ethan, I want to talk to you about something, not Ava-related. Ava looked up. Should I leave? If you want, Mason said. She stayed, which he'd expected. Mason sat down at the head of the table, folded his hands, looked at Ethan with the full gray-blue weight of his attention. The farm, your loans restructured. Your payments are manageable now, but manageable is not the same as stable. You know that. Yes. What's your 10-year plan for the property? Ethan blinked, not because he didn't have an answer. He'd had versions of the answer running in the back of his mind for 3 years, refined and revised as circumstances changed. But because no one had ever asked him the question directly. His parents talked about survival. His teachers had talked about college. Nobody had asked about the 10-year plan. Expand the herd, get the east acreage under crop rotation, long term. I want to get into direct sales farmers markets, restaurant accounts. Cut out the middlemen. He paused. And I want to do it without selling equity. The land stays in the family. Mason nodded slowly. Capital. Yeah, capital is the problem, always the problem. I have a business contact, Mason said. He runs an agricultural investment fund, small operations, family farms in the Rockies corridor. Not a bank. They take equity stakes, but they're structured differently. Limited time bounded with buyback options at pre-agreed prices. He held up a hand. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm telling you it exists. Same as park information. What you do with it is yours. Ethan looked at him. Why what? Why do you keep, he stopped, restarted. You've done the lawyer, you came into the blizzard, you gave us the bank meeting. Why do you keep finding ways to, because you saved my daughter, Mason said. Simple, flat, final. And I keep telling you I didn't do it for a reward. I know you didn't. Mason's voice didn't change. That's the whole point, Ethan. That's the entire point. You did the right thing in a situation where almost nobody does the right thing, where it cost you something to do it. You were cold and you were scared, and you went in anyway, and you kept her alive. He held Ethan's gaze. The world punishes people like you more than it rewards you. People take advantage of the fact that you'll do the right thing whether or not there's a reward. I've watched it happen my whole life. Something moved through his face. I'm not in a position to fix the whole world, but I'm in a position to make sure that in your particular case, doing the right thing doesn't put you behind. The kitchen was quiet. Ava was looking at her father with an expression Ethan had never seen on her face before, not surprise, not the recalculation she did with him. Something older, something that looked like the moment when you see a parent completely, clearly, without the filter of childhood or familiarity, and you understand them as a person rather than a role. Dad, she said quietly. He looked at her. You're a good man, she said. It was a simple sentence. 4 words. The same kind of sentence that could be said 1,000 ways and mean nothing, and could be said once in the right moment by the right person and carry a weight that knocked the air out of the room. Mason Mitchell, who did not cry in front of his men, who had held himself together through things that would have broken. Most people looked at his daughter across the kitchen table and did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, working on it, and went to get coffee. Ava looked at Ethan. Her eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together and looked down at the application on the table. He reached over, put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held on. They sat like that in the quiet kitchen, while Mason made coffee and the wind moved outside and the Montana winter did what it did, indifferent, enormous, ancient. And inside the kitchen, something small and warm and specific was happening that the winter couldn't touch. Park called on a Wednesday morning 2 weeks later. Ethan was in the barn. Of course he was in the barn. The restructuring is finalized, Park said. I'm filing the corrected documents today. Your fixed rate goes into effect on the 1st of next month. The principal credit for the overpaid interest has been processed. A pause. You're current, Ethan. Your family's farm is current. He stood in the barn with hay on his boots and his breath fogging and the cows moving in their stalls, and he held the phone and said nothing for a moment. You there, Park said. Yeah. His voice came out slightly rougher than he'd planned. Yeah, I'm here. Congratulations, Park said. Dry, efficient, and somehow warm underneath it. You did right by your family. You did, Ethan said. Mason did. You gave Mason a reason to, Park said. That's the part you keep leaving out. He hung up. Ethan stood in the barn. He thought about his grandfather, 60 years on this land. About his father learning to use a socket wrench left-handed. About his mother going over bills with her reading glasses at the kitchen table. About Lily and the barn cats and the ambition she carried so lightly and completely. I thought about a bus sliding sideways on black ice and a rope tied to a tree, and a girl he'd found on the floor between the last 2 seats, blue-lipped and alone, and the decision he'd made that had seemed so simple in the moment and turned out to be one of the most consequential things he'd ever do. He thought about the look on Mason Mitchell's face in the kitchen. Working on it, he pulled out his phone, called his mother. She picked up on the first ring. Ethan, the farm is current, he said. Park just called. It's done. The silence that followed was not. It was full dense with 3 years of compressed weight releasing all at once, with the particular sound that relief makes when it arrives after being deferred so long, you'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Mom, he said. I'm here, she said. I'm here, a breath. Go get your father. He walked out of the barn into the February cold and crossed the yard to the shop where Robert Walker was working on the old tractor that had been giving them grief since November, and he stood in the door and said, "Dad." His father looked up. "It's done," Ethan said. "The farm is ours." Robert Walker set down his wrench, looked at his son across the cold air of the shop. His jaw worked once. Then he crossed the distance between them and put his good arm around his son's shoulders and held on. They stood like that in the shop doorway, with the cold coming in and the tractor waiting and the farm around them. Theirs legally, actually, finally theirs, and Ethan put his arm around his father's back and thought about all the things that had led to this moment and how none of them had been easy and how none of them had been wasted. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post at the edge of the east pasture, looked around with the bright-eyed assessment of something that has survived everything and intends to keep surviving. Then it lifted and was gone. Spring came to Glacier County the way it always did, not all at once, not gently, but in fits and arguments. Warm days that promised everything, followed by cold snaps that took it back, the ground thawing and refreezing and thawing again until finally sometime in late April, the earth gave up resisting and just became mud. Productive, fertile, necessary mud. The kind that meant the season had actually turned. Ethan was in it up his ankles on the morning Ava drove out to the farm for the first time. He hadn't planned it that way. She'd texted that she was coming, he'd said great, and then the Eastfield irrigation line had decided that morning was the perfect moment to develop a split that needed immediate attention, and by the time her car came up the gravel road, he was on his knees in the mud, with his sleeves rolled up and a wrench in his hand and approximately no dignity whatsoever. She got out of the car and stood at the edge of the field and looked at him. He looked up at her. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. She looked at the mud, at him, at the wrench. "Do you need help? Do you know anything about irrigation lines?" "No." "Then probably not." She sat down on the fence rail, carefully testing its stability, first which showed good judgment, and watched him work. Not in a way that felt like observation, in a way that felt like company. He'd learned the difference over the past months, and the difference was everything. It took him 40 minutes to fix the line. She spent those 40 minutes on the fence, sometimes talking, sometimes not. At one point, taking out her phone and apparently texting someone. At another point, simply watching the field with the particular focused quiet she had when she was thinking something through. When he finally stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans, which were already past saving, she said, "Your grandfather's here." He turned. Earl Walker was standing on the porch of the farmhouse. Ethan hadn't known he was coming. His grandfather had a habit of arriving without announcement, which he justified by saying that announced visits made people behave differently, and he was only interested in seeing people as they actually were. He was 78 and moved more slowly than he used to, but stood exactly as straight, and he was looking at Ava on the fence rail with the expression he wore when he was working something out. Ethan walked over, mud and all. "Grandpa," he said, "I didn't know you were coming." "That's the point," Earl said. He was looking at Ava. "Is that the Mitchell girl?" "That's Ava, yes." "She sat on the fence." "She did." "Good." Earl said it with complete finality, like sitting on a fence rail was a character test and she'd passed it. "That means she's not precious about herself. Bring her over." Ava had already climbed down. She walked over without being asked, which Ethan suspected also registered with his grandfather as information. She extended her hand. "Mr. Walker, I'm Ava." Earl took the hand, held it for a moment in both of his, the way old men sometimes do, not possessively but thoroughly, like a handshake is worth doing fully or not at all. "I know who you are," he said. "My grandson talked about you." "He talked about you too," she said. "A lot." "What did he say?" "That you're the best person he knows." Earl looked at Ethan, back at Ava. "He's biased." "He's accurate," she said. Earl was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Come inside, Carol's making lunch." He turned and went in. Ava fell into step beside Ethan, their shoulders almost touching. He glanced at her. She was looking at the farmhouse with an expression he recognized, the recalculating look, but warmer than the first times he'd seen it. Like she was filing something away, not for analysis, but for keeping. "He's exactly like you described," she said quietly. "Good or bad?" She bumped his shoulder with hers. "Good. Obviously good." Lunch was loud. That was the first thing Ava registered. The Walker kitchen was loud in a way the Mitchell house never quite was, a different frequency of noise. Lily had things to say about everything and said them at the volume of someone who had grown up competing with farm machinery for auditory space. Robert talked about the East Field with Earl, and they disagreed about crop rotation strategy with the comfortable intensity of two men who'd been disagreeing about the same things for decades and enjoyed it. Carol moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd been feeding large appetites in a small space for years and had made it look effortless so long that it actually was. Ava sat between Ethan and Lily and was absorbed into it without ceremony, which was its own kind of welcome. Lily, within 5 minutes, had asked Ava 3 questions about environmental science described in detail, the medical procedure she'd performed on a barn cat the previous week. It was more of a supervised observation, but I was very involved and informed Ava that she'd looked her up online and thought her Instagram showed a really specific aesthetic that I respect even though it's not my thing. Ava, to her credit, matched Lily's energy completely. "What's your thing?" she asked. "Accuracy," Lily said, "and efficiency. Those are good things." "I know." Lily looked at Ethan. "I like her." "I gathered," Ethan said. "That's the review you wanted, right?" Lily: "You asked me last week what I thought of her, and I said I didn't know yet, and now I know." Lily picked up her fork with the air of someone who has completed a task. She sat on the fence. She didn't try too hard when she came in. She asked me a follow-up question about the cat. She nodded. "Good." Ava caught Ethan's eye across Lily's head, and her mouth was doing the thing it did when she was trying not to laugh. He was completely gone for her. He'd known it for a while and had been living with the knowledge the way you live with something true quietly, without making a production of it, letting it just be the thing that it was. Earl at the far end of the table said to nobody in particular, "In the spring, we're putting 20 new heads on the east pasture." Robert looked up. "We talked about 15. Talked about 15 in February when we didn't know the line was going to need replacing. Line's fixed now. 20. The feed cost, I've run the numbers, 20. "You've run the numbers," Robert said, with the tone of a man who has been through this exact conversation many times. "On what a napkin?" "On a napkin, that's correct," Earl said. Carol caught Ava's eye across the table and gave her a look that communicated this is what they're always like, welcome to it. Ava smiled back in a way that communicated I'm good here. After lunch, Earl asked Ethan to walk with him. They went out to the east pasture, the fixed irrigation line, the new growth just starting to show in the soil. The whole field laid out in the particular promise of early spring. Earl walked slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the land the way he always looked at it, not like he owned it, more like he was responsible for it, which was a different relationship entirely. "The girl," Earl said, "Ava. I know her name. I'm asking about the situation." Ethan walked beside him. "What do you want to know? Whatever you want to tell me." That was Earl's version of ask anything, the framing that made honesty feel like choice rather than interrogation. Ethan had grown up with it and still appreciated it. "I think she's the realest person I've met at my age," he said. "She doesn't perform. She doesn't manage how she comes across. She just is what she is." He paused. "And what she is a lot. In a good way. More than I expected. Her father is one of the best men I know. Behind you. Possibly tied with you on certain things." Earl raised an eyebrow. "High praise. Earned praise." Earl was quiet for a moment. They walked the fence line. The soil was soft and giving underfoot full of itself after the winter. "You know what the hardest thing about running something like this is," Earl said. "Not the weather, not the market, not even the bank." He looked out over the field. "It's knowing when to hold and when to grow. Most men get it wrong one way or the other. They hold when they should grow and run out of opportunity. Or they grow when they should hold and run out of ground." Ethan listened. "You've been holding for 3 years," Earl said. "Out of necessity, not out of fear." He glanced at his grandson. "There's a difference. The necessity is lifting now. What you do next says more about you than what you did when you had no choice." Ethan thought about the agricultural investment contact Mason had mentioned. He'd called the man, his name was Bennett, and he ran a fund out of Missoula and talked about farming the way people talk about it when they actually understand it rather than theorizing from the outside. They'd had 2 phone calls. The terms were being drafted. "I'm looking at outside investment," he said, "for the expansion. Through Mitchell. Through a contact of his. It's structured well, Buyback option in 7 years at a preset multiple. We keep operational control. They take a limited stake. Earl thought about that as they walked. Who's drafting the terms? Park, same lawyer who handled the loan restructuring. Good. A pause. I'd have it looked at by a second attorney, independent. Already arranged. Earl stopped, walking. Looked at his grandson with the full weight of 78 years of understanding people. You've grown up, he said. It wasn't a compliment or an observation. It was just a fact stated with the directness of a man who said true things. Been working on it, Ethan said. Something shifted in Earl's face. A smile, though he wore smiles the way he wore good boots for function, not show. Your father said the same thing to me once, about himself. He turned and started back toward the house. Come on, I want another piece of your mother's pie before you kids eat it all. The call from Marcus Chen came on a Thursday afternoon in May and caught Ethan genuinely off guard. He almost didn't answer. The number wasn't in his contacts, and unknown numbers in May often meant something agricultural and complicated. But something made him pick up. Ethan. Marcus's voice had the careful quality of someone who had rehearsed an opening and then decided not to use it. It's Marcus Chen from school. I know who you are, Marcus. Right, yeah. A pause. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for a couple of months, and I kept not doing it, which is another pause. I owe you an apology. Ethan was quiet. On the mountain, I argued against going back. And I called you names for years before that, and I made other people feel like that was okay, Marcus stopped, started again slower. I was scared on the mountain. That's the real answer. I was so scared I couldn't think straight. But scared isn't an excuse for what I said. It explains it. It doesn't excuse it. Ethan thought about what he'd said to Deke about fear, about what he'd said at Mason's dinner table, about scared being just scared, not always something permanent about who a person was. Did something change for you, he said, after the blizzard? A long pause. Yeah, Marcus said. Yeah, something changed. He exhaled. I keep thinking about we were all standing there, all of us, and we all knew she was still on the bus, and nobody moved. And I remember telling myself there were reasons not to, good reasons. And then he stopped. You just went, and I've been thinking about that ever since, about the gap between knowing the right thing and doing the right thing, and how I always thought those were the same thing for me, and finding out they weren't. Ethan didn't rush to fill the silence. I'm trying to close the gap, Marcus said. That's all I wanted to say. Ethan thought about it, genuinely thought about it, not as performance. Okay, he said. Okay, I hear you. I accept it. He paused. The gap is closable, for what it's worth. How do you know? Because you called. He let that sit. People who aren't trying to close the gap don't call. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then Ava said something similar, when I apologized to her. She's usually right. Yeah. Something in Marcus's voice shifted lighter, not completely, but noticeably. She's kind of terrifying. Only if you're not honest with her, Ethan said. Then she's fine. Marcus almost laughed. Right. A pause. Thank you for picking up. Close the gap, Marcus, Ethan said. That's all anyone can do. He hung up and stood in the yard for a moment, looking at the east pasture, thinking about all the ways one night had moved through the people it had touched. The ripples were still going. They would keep going. That was the nature of the true things. They didn't stop when the event stopped. They kept moving, touching surfaces, changing small angles, all of it too distributed and complex to fully track, but real nonetheless. He went back to work. The investment deal closed on a Tuesday in June. Bennett flew in from Missoula, shook hands with Robert and Ethan in Park's office, signed documents that two separate attorneys had reviewed and declared sound, and then said with the pragmatic warmth of a man who'd done many such closings and hadn't lost his appreciation for them. Walker Farm is a good operation. We're glad to be in it. Robert shook his hand and said, so are we. Ethan called Mason from the parking lot. Done, he said. Good, Mason said. Bennett's solid. You won't regret it. I know. He leaned against his truck, his own truck, the one with opinions about starting in cold weather, which he'd finally fixed himself over 2 weekends in April. I wanted to tell you something. Say it. A year ago, my family was looking at losing the farm. My dad couldn't work the way he used to. My mom was going through the bills every month the way you go through something you're trying to hold back with your hands. And I was picking up every side job I could find. He paused. None of that is true anymore. The farm is stable. We're expanding. My dad got offered a consulting role with the county extension office because word got out that he knows things, and he said yes, which means he's useful in a way that doesn't require his right hand. And that's the first time that's been true since the accident. He swallowed. And it traces back to one night, and to you deciding that the night mattered. Mason was quiet on the other end. You keep saying you owe me something for what I did on the mountain, Ethan said. But I need you to understand that what you gave us it's not equivalent. What you gave us is bigger. And I'm not saying that to argue about it. I'm saying it because you should know. Ethan, Mason said, yeah. My daughter is happy. His voice was quiet and direct. For the first time since she was about 12 years old, she is genuinely actually happy. She talks differently. She moves differently. She's going to school in September, Environmental Science University of Montana, and she's not scared about it the way she would have been before. She calls me on the way home from wherever she's been with you, and she's just happy. A pause. You tell me what's bigger and what's smaller. Ethan didn't have an answer to that. We're even, Mason said. We've been even for a long time. Stop counting. He hung up. Ethan stood in the parking lot for a moment. Then he got in his truck and drove to where Ava was waiting. She was at the coffee place in town that she liked, a small counter-service place run by a woman named Beth, who had been making coffee in Glacier County for 20 years and knew the orders of roughly half the population by sight. Ava was at the corner table with her laptop open, and the particular focused, but not really energy she had when she was supposed to be doing something and was mostly thinking about something else. She looked up when he came in. Done, she said. Done, he said. She closed the laptop. Tell me. He sat down across from her. Told her the signing Bennett's handshake Park's office, his father's face when it was over. She listened the way she listened, completely without performing attention, just actually there. When he finished, she said, how does it feel? He thought about it. Like when the ground thaws, he said. You've been working around the frost for so long that you forget what the ground actually feels like when it gives. And then it does, and you remember, and he stopped. It's just right. It feels like things being the way they're supposed to be. She looked at him across the small table. Good, she said. That's how things are supposed to feel. Beth brought him coffee without being asked because she'd figured out his order 2 months ago and had been serving it preemptively since, which was its own kind of welcome. My dad wants to have a dinner, Ava said. Not a small one. The whole chapter, your whole family, Deke's wife, Santos's kids. She paused. He didn't say what it's for. He just said there should be a dinner. Mason doesn't do things without reasons. No, she agreed, he doesn't. What do you think the reason is? She looked at him steadily. I think he wants to put everyone in the same room, the people who matter. She paused. And I think he's decided who matters. Ethan held her gaze. And who's that? She reached across the small table. Her hand covered his in the same gesture she'd made in his family's kitchen months ago, like making sure something is real. Us, she said simply. Everyone who's us now. He turned his hand over and held on. The dinner was on a Saturday in late June when the Montana evenings went long and gold and felt like they'd last forever, even though you knew they wouldn't. Mason had set up tables in the side yard, and the whole gathered group, bikers and farmers. Lily and Deke's wife, Margaret, and Santos's 2 teenagers, who were immediately conscripted by Lily into helping with the barn cats. Earl and Robert, talking to Roy about things Ethan could only partially hear from across the yard, occupied the space the way people occupy a space when they've chosen to be in it, rather than arrive by obligation. Earl sat next to Mason at the main table. Ethan had half expected some kind of friction between them, 2 enormously different versions of the same basic type, strong-willed men with strong opinions about the right way to do things. What he got instead was the 2 of them deep in conversation within 20 minutes, talking about cattle management and the way weather systems move through the Rockies, and then about something Ethan couldn't quite hear, but that had them both laughing in the dry, appreciative way of men who have found someone who speaks the same language. He watched that from across the yard and felt something settle in him that had been in motion for a long time. Ava appeared beside him, handed him a beer. stood close enough that their shoulders touched. Earl and your dad, he said. She watched them. My dad's been alone with his own point of view for a long time, she said quietly. He has the chapter, but they're his. It's different having someone completely outside who speaks to him like a peer. A pause. Your grandfather does that. Earl does that for everyone. No, she said. He does it for people who've earned it. Lily appeared out of nowhere, as Lily always did, with a barn cat tucked under her arm and Santos's teenage daughter beside her. Both of them looking self-satisfied in the way of people who have accomplished something. We found 3 of them, Lily announced. Margaret said the gray one might be pregnant. I'm going to monitor the situation. Good, Ethan said. I'm going to need access to the chapter's barn, she said to Ava. Ava's mouth twitched. I'll ask my dad. I already asked, Lily said. He said yes. He was actually very nice about it. She looked at Ethan with a 12-year-old's complete frankness. I like him. He's serious in the right places and funny in the right places. That's hard to do. She was gone again before anyone could respond. Mason appeared at Ethan's other shoulder. He had a way of arriving without announcing himself that Ethan had stopped being surprised by. Your sister, he said. She already asked you about the barn. She presented a very thorough case, Mason said. Referenced feral cat overpopulation statistics. I didn't know those were statistics. She's 12. I know. I'm more impressed, not less. He looked out over the yard, at Earl and Robert, at Carol laughing at something Roy said, at Deke and Margaret and the whole assembled improbable gathering. This is a good thing, he said. Not to anyone in particular, just stating a fact. Ethan looked at him. Yeah, he said, it is. Mason turned to look at him directly. The full gray-blue weight of it, the complete attention of a man who did not give his attention carelessly. That night on the mountain, he said, you made a decision in about 30 seconds that most people would spend a lifetime second-guessing. You didn't second-guess it. You didn't calculate it. You just did it. Ethan said nothing. I've been in situations where that kind of decision gets made, Mason said. By my men, for each other. It's the thing I respect most in the world. Not skill, not intelligence, not even courage, exactly. The specific thing where you see what needs doing and you do it without the interference of everything else. He held Ethan's gaze. You have that, naturally, at 20 years old. He paused. Don't let the world train it out of you. You sound like my grandfather, Ethan said. Good, Mason said. He sounds like a man worth sounding like. He turned back to the gathering. Eat something. Carol brought pea. He walked away. Ava took Ethan's hand. They stood together watching the people they loved occupy the same space, loud and warm, and completely unlike each other and entirely undeniably right together. Hey, she said. Hey, I'm going to school in September. She said it looking out at the yard, not at him the way you say something that's both exciting and terrifying, and you need the slight distance of not making eye contact to get the words out flat. Missoula, environmental science, I registered last week. He looked at her. I know, your dad told me weeks ago. He was proud in the way he pretends he's not. She laughed, real and unguarded, the same laugh she'd had in the bus in the blizzard. He is the worst at pretending he's not proud. She paused. Missoula's 4 hours. I know where Missoula is. I'm just saying. 4 hours is not far, he said. She looked at him now, finally, direct without filter the way she'd looked at him in the bus when she'd been deciding whether he was who he seemed to be. No, she said, it's not. A pause. I'll come home on weekends sometimes. I'll drive there sometimes, he said. The farm. Lily can handle things. She's basically running it already. She just pretends she's not. Ava laughed again, leaned into his shoulder. She's going to be something, she said. She already is, he said. They stood like that while the evening did what long June evenings in Montana do, stretched and deepened and went gold all the way across the sky, the kind of light that makes everything look like it was made to be looked at, like the world is showing off a little before the dark comes in, which it always does eventually. The dark always comes in, but it comes in after the light, and the light had been generous. Earl caught Ethan's eye from across the yard, gave him the nod, the same nod that had meant well done across 60 years of hard work and harder weather, the same nod that communicated more than most speeches. Ethan nodded back. Robert was smiling at something, Mason said, an unguarded smile, the kind Ethan hadn't seen on his father's face in 3 years. Carol was already at the pie, Lily was explaining something to Santos's daughter with the focused authority of someone who knows exactly what she's talking about. Deke was watching all of it with those filed-away eyes, and whatever he was filing, he seemed satisfied with. And Ava Mitchell, who had sat alone on a school bus and been left behind in a blizzard and spent 3 years behind walls that would impress a military engineer, was standing with her shoulder against Ethan Walker's and holding his hand in the gathering Montana evening, and she was not alone. None of them were. That was the thing about one good decision made in 30 seconds on the side of a mountain in a storm. It didn't just save one person. It pulled a thread that had been waiting to be pulled, and on the other end of it was a family and a chapter and a grandfather and a father and a sister and a lawyer and a hard-won piece of land and a girl going to school in September and two old men from different worlds talking like they'd known each other for years. You do the right thing not knowing what it will grow into. You do it because it's right and for no other reason. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it grows into everything. Ethan Walker, 20 years old, son of Robert and Carol, grandson of Earl Farmboy, the kid who walked into the blizzard, looked out at the life he was standing inside of and knew with the same bone-deep certainty he'd felt on the mountain when he turned and went back in that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And this time he was not walking back into a storm. He was walking into something that would last.